District Board of Commissioners, August 26, 2025 meeting for the budget workshop is now open. I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Pat Smoker, to go through the budget as that will be presented to council.
Thank you, President Anna. I will kind of go through this. I believe the spreadsheet that I have is in the same order that it should be in your packet. So we will start with account 6601, which is the district's tax revenue fund, primarily serving our trash and recycling departments. Just recently, we received the tax revenue information from the DLGF. I believe it was a week ago. In going through that, our overall revenue is approximately 0.3% lower than it was in the past, and some of that has to do with the actual revenue itself, and then obviously the circuit breaker, which you can see in row like 38 of the spreadsheet. Circuit breaker went up approximately $22,000 in that course, which is a big chunk of the 0.3% loss in and of itself is associated with that circuit breaker. I do want to discuss that as before I go down through all of this. For the last, I don't know how many years, 7 to 10 years, code enforcement was also underneath this revenue pot. Last year, Mayor Oler moved code enforcement back under the mayor and through the infrastructure and development department. Last December, there was an salary interlocal that was updated, which the sanitary district always paid portions of salaries back at the city building for shared services. You know, finance department covers all of the city, so we kind of pay a portion of that. HR, you know, also covers us. So that aspect, that hadn't been updated in about 10 years, so that was updated with the bigger Tilly pieces, but that covered the salaries still of code enforcement moving back. But it was elected as of now, the 2,000, so supplies, the 3,000, which is like contract and services, and the 4,000 capital items of code enforcement are no longer within our budget and covered by our revenue stream. So even though our revenue went slightly down in some aspects, those expenses are no longer factored into our revenue stream. Going down to personal services, overall, there's two groups of sub-accounts in 6601. There is 0505 and 0506. 0505 tends to be more of the administrative side and any splits that work towards the sewer system. And then 0506 is more of that trash and recycling and the operation side of that function. Overall, there was approximately a 10% decrease in personnel services. The primary change for that comes in the 0505 category, and that had to do with me kind of working with the team and talking to payroll and benefits. We changed some splits for some personnel. There's just some that, like the admin assistants, for instance, there was like 3 or 4 different types of splits going on there, and you know, they all work out of the same office. They are all cross-trained to work interdependently, so it made sense to kind of streamline. So it was more of a housekeeping movement, and we may end up tweaking those later. Go ahead.
So what we see as a potential decrease here will actually be an increase,
Show up in an increase elsewhere. And some of that, a good chunk of that falls in 6501 when we get there, like in stormwater. So a good instance is our MS4 coordinator position, which is very heavy in stormwater, was not paid out of stormwater at all previously. So it's kind of making some movements like that that are mostly housekeeping. It's something we may need to evaluate later and tweak. I mean, it was a kind of, to some extent, some of that's somewhat arbitrary, right? Like the billing department, the admin assistants, you know, most of the bills that go out are sewer related, but they do pull some revenue and do some work towards landfill and some towards stormwater. They do very little on the trash side. There's occasional pieces, but 0505 in trash, as we talked about, the sub-department also serves the sewer. So kind of deciding exactly where those lines are is somewhat arbitrary, and it's going to just try to come up with something that that's more streamlined in the end. But this is where we settled on for this year going forward. But in the end, you'll see a 10% decrease here. I think this does factor in a placeholder of 3% for the AFSCME bargaining unit increase, though I don't know if that's completely been settled on or finalized, but that is the placeholder that is in here. As of now, for civilians, we have had a 0% put in place for us as of right now. So again, you've got those couple changes going on in the splits, but overall in 6601, it is approximately a 10% decrease in the personal services. Under the supplies line, again, you have the 0505 and 0506 split. Both of these go up slightly. There is about $2,000 increase in the 0505, and that's primarily related to the new building, and I'll kind of go through more line items specifically. I'll pull up the detail page and call out specific accounts, but primarily what you're going to see there is things related to the new building, some electric costs, water costs, things of that nature that has in. And when we purchased that building, we did factor those into the long-term cost of the building, and it still made more sense economically. I won't hash it up, but just say that these weren't unexpected. These were planned to have occurred. 0506 went up approximately $100,000, 16% or so. And again, we'll go through that in the detail line more specifically, but primarily that's related to fuel. If you remember the last couple of years, we have not had to reappropriate any funds, but we did have to shift some funds around. Again, fuel costs are volatile. And the city has that contract up to a certain amount of gallons, and then it changes after that, and it's a little hard to predict, but just trying to use the last couple of years' average, we did move that up about $100,000, and that's really the increase that you see in that 0506 under the supplies line. The other services and charges, again, 0505 and an 0506. The 0505 line went up marginally, about 0.6%, which equates to about $25,000 or so. The 0506, it went up about $300,000, about 9% there. Again, we will go over those more specifically. There's a handful of moving parts there. In capital outlays, in total, we went up 46% there. The 0505, where we talked about that has some sewer split. Last year, for two reasons. One, we had some money still left in some projects we had that we rolled our lining into that, and we did not have to budget any capital for lining, because it's typically one of the major splits that come out of here. So without that, and I think the year before, we'd reduced the split instead of making it 50-50 for those out of 6201, 6601. With the tax fund being tighter, particularly with code enforcement's pieces in there and different things, that just made us have to rethink where the splits could occur. So now that those changes have occurred, and we moved that back in, and again, it's not lumped into a different project to do the lining. Significant in that 0505 goes up. There's also a SCADA project. Some things we need to look at for next year. So there's $200,000. So that overall went up about $450,000, $470,000. 200 of that is the SCADA project. The other is for lining. But the SCADA piece is, there's some support leaving on our current software. So we want to move that off of a PC and onto a server. The server also, with our last two lift station projects, we are now bringing that data from the lift stations in for plant maintenance to be able to view, instead of having to make rounds to all of the lift stations a couple times per week. They would be able to see it on a SCADA system live at any time they wanted. There's also some predictive maintenance things that can be pulled from that to kind of see status and health of the lift stations. But in moving to the server, that means some of the old PLCs that still existed in the plant that we're going to come around to a later project kind of need to be done simultaneously. So that is that is in there. So that's, and then we'll go through some more of that in the line by line, but that's the general piece of that. In 0506, it went down approximately 20%. About $120,000 it went down, and we're going to go over what changes those were. In the end, overall, this budget will have $732,000 in the plus going into next year. So it is healthy. We kind of left it that way. I mean, there's probably some other things we could have done capital-wise, or maybe some different split changes. But we kind of left it this for a couple unknowns. We didn't get, when we built this budget in June, we did not have what those tax dollars were going to be in the Senate Bill 01. We know was going to decrease it, so I didn't want to run it that way. And the decision to pull the 2 through 4,000 accounts of code enforcement back to the other officially had not been made yet, so I was not expecting that. I didn't want to spend money that I wasn't sure would be free at that moment. So this budget will have that $732,000 going upwards in the cash balance. Going down through the individual lines, the first note I really want to call out is in 6601, 0505, 107, 1240, which is column 69 in the spreadsheet, I believe. First note I want to make is that this had $132,000 in it, $132,812.60, which is down from the $248,019.39 it was the year previous. In talking through Controller McGinnis yesterday and last Friday, this is actually now going to go up $157,116 from the $132 that was in there. So it'll take it to approximately $280,000. The reason being here, excuse me, I botched this. Let me start over on this 1240. I'm thinking of 3410. It went up to, they just got the updated insurance last week. So there's two things going on. 3410 is the thing I was originally thinking of, but I'm going to come back to this 1240. I'm going to do this right now. The $132,812.60 is now going to be $157,116. The insurance provision, though, on line 79, which is also a 1240, again, it's just broke out in the 05 and 0505 and 0506. This has originally $617,306.29. It's actually going to go down to $569,763. So overall insurance provision went down for 6601. Moving farther down, if we go to the 2,000 accounts in 6601, 0505.
6601.
Not Excel. Okay.
In 6605, 6601, 0505, 202, 2410, the general supplies, this went up $647.36. Again, this is in relationship to the new building. This is covering like cleaning supplies for it. Again, any general supplies that they would have at the office where we used to share them at the admin building. Now they have their own slots. So there's cleaning supplies. There is like just miscellaneous things that they might need to have, like toilet paper, these types of things, paper towels, things of that nature. Primary reason. There's some of that 647 that's also just inflation for the other buildings that are going to be using this. So the garage at the of the trash department and the admin building has some splits in this as well. So it's a little bit of inflation on all those, but adding in the whole other building and its cleaning area. Again, as we talked, if you go down to column 97, 6601, 0506, 203, 2210, this is the fuel, vehicle operation and maintenance, but this is a fuel account. You'll see that this went up $101,000, and this is kind of based on history. Like I said, the last couple years, we've had to not reappropriate, but we've had to shift unused funds in multiple accounts to kind of cover that fuel cost. And since fuel has been semi-steady, we're going to kind of use that last 2 years of history and kind of we've moved it there so that we would not have to do that. The tires and tubes, just a couple lines below that, in column 99, 6601, 0506, 203, 2212. We have reduced that line by $4,000, again, somewhat based on history. We've typically budgeted around $60,000, but we're not spending that whole volume. The tricky part here is you don't know what tires are going to go. Some of the trucks are getting older, particularly like the residential trash trucks and things of that nature. So we didn't want to completely go on a couple years when the trucks were new and assume that that's going to be what we spend this year. But we did hedge it down a little bit. But the funds we took down from there, we moved down a couple lines to column 102 to 6601, 0506, 203, 2321, so repair parts. Vehicles, the cost of repair parts has just gone up significantly over the past 4 or 5 years, and we've been getting tighter and tighter on this. So some of that tire money that was shaved off was reappropriated down there. Moving down into the 3,000 accounts. We have in line 6601, 05, it's column 125, 6601, 0505, 302, 3210, telephone and facsimile. This has gone up. In the contractual services line and professional services line above, there were some decreases there, and those are kind of based on specific needs. Professional service depends on what project do I got going on, these types of nature, but those decreased. But the telephone facsimile went up, and we moved those decreases kind of down to here. A lot of this has to do with the asset management. If you remember, we purchased those tablets, and we were going to put that system live, so a lot of those will have data packages and things of that nature. So that is the increase, particularly in that line there. Postage, which is the line right below that, column 126. That one had an increase that we did this year. There was postage kind of partially in a different account, and it was more of a housekeeping issue. It was just easier to put it all in one account and budget it that way. So that 8,000 went up, but you see that again here. There's again some smaller shaving, like in professional and contractual services. Contractual services was some of that postage piece in there, so it was kind of moved down. So again, it was just a shuffle, not really an actual increase in the overall postage amount. It's just cleaning up account numbers that it was being spent from. Property and liability insurance, column 131, 6601, 0505, 304, 3401. This was the one I was explaining earlier. The value that was in place, and I don't even have that marked now, but that has changed and went up to $202,718.61. Overall, on the splits, it went up slightly in all 4 funds. Well, the overall total amount went up slightly, but when they were doing the allocations, there was a formula error, and a lot of this went into 6501, which went from like $6,000 to $126,000. And this was the correction in talking to the controller this week, that offset of 120-ish thousand we put back in here because it just made more sense. But you'll see even at 202,000, it's still below the 263,000 that it was last year. or this year, I guess. If you go down 2 columns, you'll see the, so in 133 and 134, the 3510 and 3540, these are electric and water facilities. So the cost of both of these, there were rate increases under both those things. And again, we have a new building, so for the splits. So factoring in the new building and the increased costs for those 2 things have went up. If you go down a couple more lines to column 137 in 6601, 0505, 312, 3815, the lease payment column, this column is going up $55,466. We are anticipating getting a new residential trash fleet, probably entering into the agreement next year. We probably wouldn't get the vehicles till very late next year or early in the year after. But we do have estimated costs on what those leases would be, particularly with trade-in of the existing fleet. And we talked a little bit at one of our normal scheduled meetings about when we leased, I think it was a couple of the commercial trucks, we did not do the trade-in then because the lease that those were under at that time was pre the 50% increase we've seen on trucks since COVID. So we didn't want to trade it in on the agreement that was there. We know we could probably trade it in with some of that cost increase, so we held those. So factoring in the trucks we would probably trade in on this, we expect that the total lease would go up $55,466 and that would be 6 new residential trucks. And again, that is significant. I mean, I know it's a significant chunk of money, but the residential trucks we have now were bought pre-COVID, and they've gone up 50% now. So to only see 55,000 on 6 trucks to only see 10,000 increase is very significant per truck. Significant savings per truck. Subscriptions and dues. There's the line right below that. Went up $150, I think, but that's IWEA memberships that we have. If you go down to column 142, which is the 3974 column, in the transfer of funds, this is going down, but there's this column partially contains anything we send to the capital improvement funds, and there's nothing allotted to the capital improvement in this line right now. And as I kind of spoke earlier, this overall account is going to go up in its cash balance, that $700,000. Again, this was an area we typically would have put money into. And again, it's technically kind of like a cash balance, it's just where you're putting it and allotting it. But since there were some unknowns when we actually budgeted it, we just left that off at the time. So again, this is an area we likely would have shuffled money otherwise. If you go down to column 147 in the 3990 contractual services, down here in the 0506 column, there is an increase in this line. This is based on changes we expect with that recycle program. If you remember, we are going to do away with hand sorting as we do that, but we will be shipping that to whoever holds that contract for us to auto sort that, but that means we're going to have to pay that shipping cost. So this is the line that would fall under. Now, again, we will still get a rebate for the material we send. It's just, it kind of comes in, kind of reduces whatever you're sending on the shipping side. And overall, we still think we come out ahead in the end, but it does increase in this line. But weirdly, the recycling falls under a revenue stream in the landfill's 2221 account. So that's where you will see some changes to kind of that. Now, we were very conservative on what that increase would be. We don't exactly know when the routes will come online and when we'll start collecting the material. So we're conservatively high here and conservatively low on the revenue side. Just, we're pretending like we're going to be sending it out all year, but it's likely going to be probably half of a year or something, really realistically. As we go down a little further, in column 150, This, we reduced this by $1,500, and that's the fuel oil in the facilities. So that's kind of like natural gas and things of that nature. There's that we're using for those buildings, but it's just historically we haven't been using all those funds, even with changes in rates and different things like that. We reduced that some, but the line right below that in electric, that has gone up. So most of that 1,500 we put as an increase into that, the electric costs. Gas facilities, a similar thing, just as the fuel oil facilities, historically we'd seen that we were not using all those funds, so those were reduced kind of based on historical averages and the current rate for those things. But water had gone up, and we were using a lot similarly, so there's a similar offset there, so they kind of both offset each other in those increases you'll see. The next major item that you will see is down in the column 159, which is the other transfer of funds. This one here, again, there's an 0505 and 0506. I know that sometimes gets confusing. The 0505 had nothing going to capital improvements. The 0506 does have some items going to the capital improvements that are specifically associated with the operation side. So that's really what you see, that driving factor for. There's a little bit, the other major point of this, $940,000 of that is what the trash department pays back to the landfill department for trash that they collect and deliver to that landfill. We do that resolution every year at the beginning of the year. So we usually see maybe a 1% increase in trash, so it's kind of a factor of that. There's a rate increase still that was passed in 2022 for the landfill, so it goes up 2%, I think, in its overall cost there. So those things are factored in as well, but the biggest movement piece there is again what's going back to the capital improvement. And when we get to, I think there's a detail for that down here further. I can pull up exactly what we were earmarking for that. Apologies for the delay here.
Turned it off.
Okay, yes, so there was 283,000 put back for the transfer station. We've been slowly putting money back in the capital improvement for a transfer station, which would be a facility at the landfill that instead of sending vehicles up to the top of the landfill hill, it would receive that at the bottom on the concrete, and then it would there would kind of likely be a slot in the back that has a big semi dump bed, and the trash would go into there. So you're kind of moving this one trailer up and down the hill versus all the trash trucks, which are really not designed for off-road. So we think we can extend the life and reduce maintenance costs on the trash fleet itself. But we also think keeping customers off, we think it'll be just easier traffic control to keep them off the face of the cell. And you know, there's exposed trash there and different things like that. It's easier to coordinate at the transfer station. We would likely also at some point in time move the MRF equipment that's currently at the wastewater treatment plant out to that transfer station and house it. Kind of just a more efficient overall housing for that, but that is what's going back. But there's been money going back into that for 3 or 4 years, and it's likely something that will still take another 3 or 4 years to get enough funds to be able to actually put up and build out there. Moving down rows, in column 165, you are going to see $218,264, and this is where we talked about that split to sewer projects. Lining typically is a 50-50 type split. Last year it was not in there. We'd use some funds that were left in some of the other projects we had going on, and we did the lining through that instead of having to use any of these funds at all. We used already older appropriated funds and covered that. There was a year or so there too because of just the tax fund getting tighter and tighter, where we were kind of reducing some of that split. But we were able to come back and do that. And again, that shaves off cost in the 6201 user fee column. If you go down to column 170, in the 4490 account, other equipment, 200,000 of that overall $207,000 increase, but 200,000 of that is that SCADA project I mentioned earlier. There's some needs we have to upgrade that for support reasons and for being able to fully bring online the SCADA pieces that were in the Hayes and Short Creek project. And then lastly, the other 4490, the 0506, 4090, 4490 that's in column 172. This column has a decrease, and again, it's just a change in what capital we were purchasing. And some of that fluctuates here, right? We always are comparing whether we want to lease vehicles or purchase outright, and those are big changes as those $300,000 trucks flip back and forth, and overall time and those things. So again, it's just changing what is in the 5-year capital. And that is overall all that I have for 6601, unless there are any questions. If not, we can move to 2221, which is primarily serves the landfill. Overall, in this account, we are showing a 12% decrease in revenue. And I kind of want to go over this a little bit. The charges and services line, there is a 2% increase on trash that will be going in, that was approved in the 2022 rate adjustments. But we do know that, we do know that Rumpke has recently purchased a landfill in Henry County. And they let us know that some of the waste that they were bringing to our facility, they're now going to be taking to their Henry County facility. So this is us trying to use the decrease we saw this year from that purchase of that landfill. And also, we talked last year as well, construction doesn't come in linear. We usually get a few big projects. We got like 1 or 2 less big projects last year, and those are kind of hard to predict. But this year so far, we are about 1 down from normal as well. So factoring both those things in, we wanted to put what we thought was a conservatively low representative of what we might actually receive, just to be prepared. So that's really what's driving that 12% difference that you see here. In the personal services, overall, there is a 2% decrease in this line. This kind of goes to what we talked about in 6601. One, we changed some splits for housekeeping reasons, the way some salaries were split. But then there was the AFSCME bargaining unit earmarked value while they're in negotiations. And then there is the 0% that was put in for civilians. In the supplies line, they're virtually the exact same. It's about $600 increase total of that $174,000. We'll go through line by line here in a little bit, or significant line by line. Other service and charges of the 3,000 accounts, overall, there is a 15% increase in this. And we'll go through those lines, but primarily this comes from money that we are putting into the capital improvement funds. It's not technically an expenditure as of yet, it's going into the capital improvement fund for an anticipated expenditure. Capital is going up 9% approximately, from 1.6 million to 1.7 million. This is primarily associated with the cost of a new compactor that is coming in. This year, the capital was high at the 1.6 million itself as well. There was a D8 bulldozer purchase, which has already been awarded through here. I think we're still waiting on the contract piece for that. And I'll kind of go down here just real quick, and I'll kind of come back and wrap this together here real quick. But overall, you will see that there is a decrease in this operating budget at the bottom of $1.7 million. I do want to call out that there's $700,000 in this year's budget for closing of a cell that we've put in every year. We're kind of waiting on IDEM to tell us when that would be. That is not being spent this year, so $700,000 that's coming off of cash in 2025 will not actually be coming off in cash, so that does roll into this. So that does kind of decrease that overall cash balance. It wouldn't be that $4,534 at the bottom. It's going to be more like $700,000 for assuming that all other dollars are spent, which we are not tracking towards spending all of the other dollars that were budgeted in 25. But that takes me back to talking about these capital items. Heavy equipment, we have seen go up about 50%, like talked about the trash trucks, since 2021. So this, it puts us in a, having to really look at this long-term, and Rumpke has bought that landfill in Henry County, and so how does this weigh in for us? What's this long-term sustainability look like, again, with going down 2 years in a row, eating into that cash balance? We've kind of met and talked, and we're kind of reevaluating long-term of, is there a different sweet spot on how long you keep equipment? So for instance, if you keep a bulldozer for more than 3 years, you usually have to end up putting an undercarriage on it, which can cost you $50,000 to $80,000. We've typically traded in, but is it maybe better to put that on and then factoring in what are new trade-in costs with these 50% increases of these pieces? So we're evaluating that. We've also looked at, we think the next time it comes around to the D8 dozer, we no longer will go with D8s. We will go with D6s now that we've purchased different haul trucks. We no longer need the big scraper that the D8, you have to have a D8 over the D6 to run that. We don't need that anymore with the haul trucks. So we think we can really get some savings, approximately $500,000 in savings by not having to buy D8s in the future, go to D6s. And in that first year, obviously, we'll be trading in a D8 for a D6. So should be a significant savings on that year, but trying to look at sustainability with these different factors coming into the landfill, and a little bit just going long-term. If we are losing some trash and revenue from another landfill being there, it doesn't fully translate linearly to, it does lengthen the life of a cell, right? So there is some factors in there. You should be able to go longer on cell construction and a little bit longer on cell closures. But a lot of your O&M costs don't really change with that loss of revenue, right? I mean, the amount of equipment you have, the fact that you have to cover it with 6 inches of dirt in the cell every day, those things do not change. So it's not completely linear in savings by losing that. So we'll just kind of have to track that over a few years. So we're trying to factor all those things in, again, to make sure that we're budgeting more sustainably and looking at what that is. I mean, there's obviously rates can be looked at, but we don't want to, that shouldn't be the only approach. We should be looking at how can we extend the life of these heavy, expensive pieces of equipment. And again, the transfer station to some degree will help on some other aspects, not really the bulldozers or things like that that are going to be on the cell regardless, but there are some other factors that could help us with. So we are kind of evaluating that, but the big note was that we're looking at sustainability, but there is $700,000 that will not be spent for sure this year because we are not closing that cell this year. I'll switch over to the 22-21 detail. Kind of go through some of the specific lines where there are changes. The first one is in column 64, 2221, 0503, 202, 2410. The general supplies, there's about an $800 increase in this account. So health and safety, which purchases like AED batteries, which are very expensive on like 5-year cycles. So those are kind of coming around, and then they kind of budget as they kind of purchase in bulk, like some of the other safety gear, like the vests and the glasses and the hard hats and things like that. And as those supplies are running down in their budget, so part of that is that. The other aspect is, again, there's some general admin split on general supplies. So some of that is factoring in that as well. In safety supplies, which is the line right below that, some of that is health and safety as well. Not everything that they purchase falls under safety supplies. Some of it's general supplies, which is kind of like those vests sometimes, or the hard hats. There's a little breakdown of both and how they split it, but that is part of it. There's cleaning supplies, again, that can kind of fall under this. There's gloves. So some of those things came around. They were looking at, they've depleted some of their bulk. And that's where that is. And again, that was a savings in that line. So the line below that, the 2210, which is the fuel line, as we talked about in the other one, there's just been trying to track that fuel. So this is going up $1,500 as well. So it's kind of an offset of the safety supplies that went down. The next one that really has any real significant change is down in column 85. So we're switching over to the 3,000 accounts, the contractual services, or the services accounts, the 3,000s, but column 85, the 2221, 10108, 312, 3988 intergovernmental charges. This goes up $32,000. This is that updated interlocal. Again, the city updated that in December of last year. But that was, I don't know, it was about 10 years old at the time, but it didn't factor in any of the Baker-Tilly pieces and code enforcement moving back to its piece. So all those updates were in, and it's kind of spread out over all 4 of sanitary district's funds. There's intergovernmental, but you'll kind of see all those go up some from that amended ordinance that was done in December. Down to column 93, the 2221, 0503, 302, 3210, which is telephone and facsimile. This increases about $1,000. And again, this comes back to that asset management and those tablets and the way those splits are done with those data charges that are factored into that. There were, under column 97, the 2221, 0503, 304, 3401, the property and liability insurance. This is going down. And again, we just got these numbers in the past week. It goes down to $44,892. It was $59,784. They updated those, and again, then it's kind of a formula that splits it out, allocation to all the different funds throughout the city that HR had put those in. Electric facilities, which is column 99. This is based just on historical use at the landfill building, and we reduced that by $6,500. Going down, column 110, 2221, 0503, 312, 3941, state fees. These are really about the same. We may end up having to increase those. We did get a notice from the state where they had changed some of their fees. So we may end up having to increase that potentially up to $8,000 or $9,000 on that aspect. It kind of depends. We also use in the line right below that 3942 in district fees. There's a split in kind of the way those two things are paid, and that one's going down $63,000. So we may end up, that would be where we pulled that 8,000 if we needed to shuffle it up to there. Because not all of their fees, we pay several different items. We have several different permits with them. We have an air permit, the regular landfill permit, compost permit. So they changed some of those, and that's why we have two different lines that we're kind of paying this out of. In there, the line 3942 also, however, so column 111, the district fees also factored in the WR's tipping fee before, which if you remember, that has been dissolved. The county does have the option to put a tipping fee back in if they wished. We have a really small value put in here for that in case they put it back in to some degree, because the timing of it likely couldn't start at the first of the year based on the way it is, so we know it would be a partial year. But if that does come in, just know that it's a pass-through. The revenue would go up because it's collected at our scales. It's not just a cost that we pay. It's just we collect it at our scales and then we pay it back to them where that is. So even if they do change it or it goes up, it's just a pass-through. That's a pass-through account. The next one is right below that, column 112, which is the transfer of funds account. There is a $289,000 increase in this. This is also funds going into a capital improvement fund. So again, not an actual expenditure. It's being earmarked for a later expenditure, which is cell construction in the future. That was part of the idea when we increased those rates, is that we would put funds back every year for cell construction. So when that comes around, you don't see those huge dips in the cash. Moving down into the capital outlays, you will see that in column 117, the other structures account, that this goes down approximately about $40,000 overall from what was planned before. And again, this really comes down to structures are usually like building modifications, changes to the scale house, fencing, things of that nature. But the column right below that, 118, a row right below that 118, the 4490, it goes up, and that's again the difference. This year we bought a D8 bulldozer, and next year we will be buying that compactor, and that's just based upon what we think that compactor may be. That is all I have directly for 22-21, unless there are additional questions or comments. Move on to the 4650, which is one of the capital improvement funds. So in this fund, you will see earnings on investment estimated at $10,000. You will see that we would be transferring in $489,000. And again, that is for that landfill cell construction that was mentioned. In the capital outlays, you'll see $380,000 that would be planned to be spent. You also see $380,000 in the 2025 budget. That is also for cell closure, but again, we will not be spending that in 2025. So that $380,000 that's in there for 2025 will not get spent. So that's not really coming off of the cash of the cash balance for this year. In the end, after next year, with all planned expenditures, this account should still have over $1 million in this fund that is available for projects. So again, that kind of can also be used, right, as we're dipping down in the cash balance on the other side and leaving it with about $700,000. If there were emergencies or things like that, these capital improvement funds do still exist. They're just earmarking funds. Yeah, you go to the detail page, it's really 4650 detail. There's really not any more detail really to explain on the capital improvements. There's not a whole lot going on there. It's just the transfer in, as we discussed, and that landfill cell closure going out.
How much was our last cell closure? Is it just,
I think it was like 1.1 million, but it really depends on acreage and different factors. You know, it's not just, you know, cell closure is a fixed cost. We've tried to, I know Elijah worked with us and Andrews did, and we've kind of looked at what we anticipate we could be asked to close and what that acreage is. So it's approximately this $1.2 million is what we would expect to be asked.
so we're looking at needing 3 to 4 years to save for it, basically, and will a cell last 3 to 4 years?
Cell should last 7 years.
Okay.
And again, that's depends on varying things. We've seen slightly less overall tonnage coming in, so that makes it last a little longer, but I would still say 5 to 7 years is what I would want to use as a measure. And again, not every cell is the exact same size. We're kind of, you kind of build this pyramid and you kind of cap out on airspace based on slopes, and we build on the shoulder, and then that allows airspace total. Now the pyramid's base is wider, you can go up as well. So there's several factors in there, but roughly 5 to 7 years with how we've allotted those. Good, we can move on to the 6201 account, which is the sewer account. Overall, we expect about a 1% increase in revenue in this line from what was budgeted the year before.
So we're at this point in time not budgeting for a rate increase.
Yes, we actually, if you remember last year, we budgeted because we believed that that would occur then. So it's 1% from what we budgeted last year. We will likely fall a little short this year because we did not present it or bring it forth. But there's an offset because the bond, we actually show the bond for that, the proposed Midwest Industrial Park bond was in here. So it was a 1-to-1 piece. So we won't be spending that either. So we don't actually lose any funds there. So it would be a 1% increase from what was budgeted. It's obviously would be more like a 6% probably total if you factor that it wasn't in last year, and if the rate goes in as it was originally proposed, which has not passed yet. So it's a placeholder, but we're not sure exactly on that. But if it comes down or up, the other comes off as well. So
As a capital.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So it and it actually shows up in the, I think it's in the transfer funds to the, because it goes to the BONY, to one of the bond funds, which is a pass-through account itself. But again, it's a 1-to-1, so if you don't get one, you don't spend the other, so. Going down to personal services here, there are 4 sub-funds in 6201. There's 0504, 0505, 0507, 0508, which is primarily sewer maintenance, admin, operations, and then laboratory, respectively. Overall, there's an 11% increase in these. Again, there is that placeholder for the ASME bargaining unit. There is the 0 placeholder for civilians, and then there's the changes in splits that were worked upon. In the supplies line, Overall, there's a 3% increase in that. And we'll kind of go through those lines. There's a couple that decrease and a couple that increase overall, but subcategories, in the other services and charges, this goes up approximately 4% overall. So it's going up about $400,000. And we'll kind of go through those individually. A big shift you'll see is in the 0508 sewer lab. But that increases, we move things from capital. There are a couple items that we, like our partnership with USGS, our partnership with Linko, which is a software that they use, and the watershed grant that we were part of. There were some capital items that were purchased with that, or they were a project originally to get those things installed or upgraded, but now they're more service fees, so we switched it back down to the 3,000 accounts, but you would see the lab's capital kind of decrease equivalently here. In overall capital outlays, we are showing a 13% decrease of, which is approximately $800,000 of a decrease in that line. Going down to the bottom, you'll see overall, we are showing that this account would eat into its cash balance $3.4 million. We're also showing that this year would eat into it $3.5 million. But note that approximately 2.5 of the 3.5 for this year is going to be unspent. Again, these were earmarked for projects that we know we're not going to end up getting to this year, and they're getting shuffled to next year. And I also want to state that when we talked last year during the budget, that 3.5 was anticipated in the rate review that was done in 2022. Again, we know there were going to be some dips in cash. The rate was to hold it, so we still held our bond capacity. So these are not unplanned. These are part of a really of a 5-year piece. But again, we're only going down about 1 million this year. Likely, and then, like I said, next year's is there, but they both follow along with what we anticipated based on those capital items. Again, those capital items were in our 5-year review. They were also included in that rate study that was done in 2022 and incurred into that rate. We will go through 6201's detail. The first piece that I'll talk about is column 50, row 52, 6201, 0504, 107, 1240. This is that insurance provision. This did change. Those numbers did update. I believe your book says $211,377.80. This went to $164,000, $164,023. So there was some savings in those insurance once those numbers were updated. I think they were updated yesterday. Going further down, I think I missed one. There's a couple, again, there's 4 subcategories, so we'll kind of talk about that insurance provision in all of them. I think they all have their own category. So if we look at the one for row 82, the 6201-0507 insurance provision, I think your books say $318,006.27. That moves to $310,780. Another insurance provision in row 93, the 0508 one. Your books, I think, say $93,531.25, and that moves to $87,330. As we move down, first one I'll talk about here into the 2,000 accounts, into the supplies line, is row 101, the 6201, 0504, 203, 2210, vehicle operations and maintenance. This is a fuel account. And this is going over this one reduces $10,000 just based on historical spending of this department. This is sewer maintenance's department. It's just, again, based on history there. Going down further, if we, let's see, where is it? Row 115, office supplies. Again, there was, and I don't know what you guys see here, some of these will show like a $957 decrease. It's really, if you look at column D, you see it looked like it went up $1,000. That's carryover of POs from the year before, but the actual budgeted amount here is the same, and/or it's somebody reduced something and transferred funds in there, but it's, again, it's not an actual true, we didn't truly come back to this board and appropriate funds to that 2,200. They were either transfers or carryover POs from 2024 that weren't closed, or the invoices hadn't been paid and they transfer over to this. But even though it shows a $957, it's really not, we're not really budgeting an increase in that. But the next big line you'll see is row 118, which is the 0507, the operation fuel line. This one is going up, and again, based on history and how those operate. But operations includes the operations department, as well as like the plant maintenance department. So there's a few other, when I say operations, it's not just our operations group, those 6 people. It's all the operations underneath the treatment plant. Down into the 3,000 accounts. The first one we should talk about is row 150, 3120 professional services line. There were some overall decreases in certain aspects, but this line itself is going up 16,000. There's a couple pieces to this. There's first, invoice cloud changes. It reduces some aspects, but that software also increases here, but it decreases some other lines that we have in that piece. And that was presented when we presented it. We knew there was some increased cost in this piece, but paper calls and some time and labor, those things all decreased and should have offset these dollar amounts. Denise has been working, we really got portions of that invoice cloud up in December, but as we debugged it before we kind of rolled out the further aspects to the public of really getting them on board, debugging it was just what it was doing in the back end, and we had to have a couple modules built and things like that. So we really don't have a ton of data on pushing it to the public. We may have 4 or 5 months, but not enough to really track that it's going this way. But Denise has been pulling metrics and showing how many people per month are switching over to doing that paperless and the electronic versions of it. And so we do expect to still see those savings. The other aspect here is some on-call engineering that we built in there. We still have that vacant assistant engineer position where Gerald had moved on, and because of that flow, we have had to utilize occasionally some on-call engineering, and this is where you'll see that increase in this line. The next line to discuss would be the contractual services, the row 152, 6201, 3990. There's a few things here that we have. We are expecting to put a sign up at the new billing office. There will be a sign that goes there. There's also cleaning that has to be done there. It doesn't fall into those personnel, so there's cleaning that has to go there. All the rest of the sanitation buildings are cleaned by staff, but there's just a change with that new building on that one. To be able to do that, there's also some other things that just, our contracts have went up that we've bid out, so we anticipate slightly increased costs in a few of those. The line right below that, or the row right before that, or not right before that, right below that, that column is, or that row is 153. That is telephone facsimile. It's the same thing we discussed in the other. There's a lot of these tablets that are going to be out there in aspects with the asset management software, and those are budgeted through these lines right here. We go down to rows 158 and 159. These are aspects, again, that HR and benefits put in, but it's workers' compensation premiums and property and liability insurance. Workman's comp, based on how those things came in, is going up about $5,000. The property and liability insurance, though, the 3401, is going down about $30,000 there, so there's some changes in those insurance liability pieces there. If we go down to row 163, which is the 6201, 0505, 3815 lease payment, there's a net decrease there of $33,000. And again, that's just, we changed some leases that we had. And primarily, these are the flush trucks that we have, and we just changed those process, got different trucks as we went through the last couple of years, and that changes that. That overall lease amount needed there. The next line is row 169, the 3974 transfer of funds. This goes up approximately $304,000. This is primarily that bony for the Midwest Industrial Park. Most of that was factored in last year, but as we got newer numbers or update pieces, we made slight tweak to that column. Going down 2 more rows to 171, this is the intergovernmental charges. We talked in the others. As that intergovernmental piece was updated, those changes are spread out. And again, that was approximately a 10-year-old agreement that was updated in December, and it's spread out over all 4 funds. But that goes up $65,743. If we go down, the next one significant to talk about, I think, is row 188, the 6201, 0508, 301, 3990 contractual services. You'll see this going up about $95,000, but as we talked at the beginning, there's about $100,000 that decreased in capital. That, again, these, after that first year, these are really services or agreements in, so it switched down to here, and that was really that USGS, that LINCO, and the watershed project piece, and that's really just increased laboratory cost. Moving down into the capital items, we can go over these in the row 198, the 6201, 0505, 502, 4321, capital project. Overall, there's about a $1.3 million reduction there. If we go down to the details of this page, you can see all the specific projects that are being planned for next year that are listed there. So again, it's always project-driven specifically. But you can see the ones that are listed there, which we have as, I'll just call them out. There's program sewer projects. There is sewer rehab risk management. There is emergency sewer repairs, CSO Long-Term Control Plan Round Barn Road West, CSO Long-Term Control Plan Chester Boulevard Phase 3, the Biosolids Facility. This is a piece that was in this year's budget as well, part of that 2.5 that wasn't spent this year. The CSO LTCP Round Barn Northwest, and the CSO LTCP Midwest Industrial Park I&I portion of that. The capital under the 4412 pumping station. This overall is going up. Again, if we scroll down to the 4412, you can see what lift stations are planned to be rehabbed next year. So we have the Airport Road lift station. There's some IT lift station. So again, some of that's tied to that SCADA type pieces or any kind of things in those components. The landfill lift station as well is one that we have in there for next year. The next one that we have is treatment plant equipment. This one also goes up slightly. You can see that list of equipment that is budgeted down below. Several items: SCADA upgrades, actuator valves, grading and railing, asset management, rectangular drive units, IPB upgrades, replacing the ops UTV, and the SCADA project we mentioned in the other. This is the other factor of that, where it's, again, there was a split involved in that. Going to back up top, the 4414, which is equipment and laboratory. Again, you see about an $80,000 or so, about a $107,000 decrease in that budgeted item, which again, we talked about that just got shifted to the contractual services. Maintenance equipment, there's a significant decrease in that line. And again, we could go down and look at the specific projects and see what those are. And then the row 204, the 4490, the other equipment, this one is going up. And again, it's specific equipment, but we can kind of go down and look at what those are. So we have some of the bigger equipment that you're going to see kind of in here. Is there some SCADA upgrades? There is a dump truck in here, dump bed on a vehicle, some sewer materials, a backhoe, which is a big driving cost, a change that wasn't in there. There's replacement of a vehicle in an engineering department. And there's the admin splits, which I could get into those, which usually covers like roof repairs and painting and just miscellaneous building repairs. That is what I have primarily for 6201 in the detail, unless there are further questions. Now we can go on to the 6202. I'm going to kind of breeze through this really quickly. This overall count is a bond fund. It is a pass-through. It is a pass-through account. Essentially, what should be coming in here is what goes out of here. There's a couple of pieces that it's not all the way adjusted. Again, we're anticipating having that Midwest Industrial Park, but that has not been closed on. It's not an official number in here, but essentially this is just whatever gets paid there comes out of the 6201, would transfer into this, and this pays that dollar amount. I'm going to skip the 6202 detail, as there's not, again, really any detail to go over in there. Move on to 6501. Overall, we expect about a 15% increase in the revenue side of this. That's based on history as well as the proposed rate adjustment that was before you in the resolution a few weeks back. So it's, again, it's assuming that that gets passed. It's in here. If it does not, there's projects that would come off simultaneously, so they would be one-to-one. Piece. The personal services go up quite a bit here. This is one where we changed a lot of the splits that we talked about. This is something we may review again later. Again, just make sure that it fits in this. We believe they all fit with the splits of how we've done them, but whether they fit in this revenue stream as we think they will is going to be a long-term evaluation. Supplies, there was about an 8% decrease, which is equivalent of about $3,000. In the other services and charges, there is it shows a slight increase here, but I'll go over that is related to that 3401 on that liability that I discussed that was switched earlier, and we re-changed it. So most of this is into, instead of this going up about $120,000, specifically to insurance provision, now it goes up about $400, so that will really come off of that line there. Capital projects is the biggest increase here. It goes up about $1 million. That is for the Bachmeyer detention pond project, which we've kind of spoke about multiple times and different things we've worked on, the Scott Ditch study and different things as we're evaluating that, but that project comes around at this point in time. You will see then that there is a dip in the cash in this fund as well, which again is kind of anticipated as we looked at that proposed rate in different pieces. But again, a driving factor here is that Bachmeyer project, that singular piece of capital. But do make a note that $563,313.48, that would be the ending cash balance. That should go up approximately $120,000 as well because of that change in that property and liability. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more in the detail. So as we go through here, first thing to talk about is row 30, the 6501, 0502, 107, 1240 insurance provision. We've talked about this in all the different ones. They just got those numbers this week. And what you guys see as $65,471 is going down to $60,429. So there's approximately a $5,000 savings in that line. Row 36, the 2410 general supplies line, based upon some history and just we reduced that by about $2,800. Professional services, in row 44, this is going up to some degree. And again, this is very specific on specific needs. This also has like that on-call engineering if we needed it in those aspects. Contractual services, the row right below that, is decreasing approximately $61,000. And again, we can go through the list, but that's just very specific to what projects or what needs that we have. It fluctuates year to year. As was called out on the front page in row 48, the 6501, 0502, 304, 3401 property and liability insurance premiums. You guys have a value that looks like $126,000 and some in there. That is down to $6,000 now. So it decreased $120,159.37. Yeah, and again, they have a formula and it breaks it out, and there was just an error. It should have hit 6601 and not this department, but the way the formula distributed it did that way. But again, Controller McGinnis we kind of went through that and reallocated that yesterday evening. The next piece, again, is down in the Capitol, and it's really what we discussed there. That primary driving factor is that Bachmeyer project. That is all I have here, unless there are any additional questions about the Stormwater Fund.
Was the Bachmeyer project scheduled to start, that's why it's budgeted, it's gonna start in 2026, or?
That's
we're
the idea.
Proposing,
There's still some things up in the air as far as the timing of that and how it's, what exactly the project's gonna end up being, so.
okay,
Yeah, so we have not bid that project or anything of that nature. It's an estimated cost, and we anticipate doing that next year, but
got it.
next, well, item here is the 6505, which is the Stormwater's Capital Improvement Fund. So again, there are some funds being transferred into this. $308,000 are coming in. In the capital outlays, you see $825,000. That would be going out, and we'll go over what those items are. So there's some movement here. I do want to make a note, though, down in row, so it'd be the ending cash balance in 57. There are some unspent funds that occurred in a couple years previously, and if you guys remember last year during our budget workshop, Tracy McGinnis and I had to go audit these accounts and manually enter them. For some reason, BSNA wants to grab appropriated funds, even if they weren't spent in those past years, and subtract them off in these. But at the end of 2026, this should actually have, even if we spend everything we're anticipating in that time frame, it should have $1,689,967 in it, not the $369 that it shows at the bottom there. Again, it's grabbing some things that were unspent in a couple of years and thinking that we did spend those, because it's just pulling from the appropriated line. So we will correct that. If we go to the detail page, it doesn't have it at the bottom for what's coming in. I'll have to switch. I'll have to go to a different sheet here in a second. So I'll go through it, but I will go through the capital projects that are looking to be have money for it. But there's $687,500 would be to the biosolids facility. There was $138,000 in the capital improvements for Bachmeyer as well that would go to, and that equals that. Let me switch sheets and tell you what the 308 coming into it is for. Maybe I will. It's a little cumbersome. Those funds is for just a few other capital projects that we have down the line, it looks like we have some money maybe going back for the Sycamore Lane and a couple other miscellaneous
Oh,
capital projects for the 650. So that's all I have for 6505, unless there are other questions. Moving on to 6207, which is the capital improvement for the 6201 sewer fund. This one would have $1,465,000 transferring into it for projects, and we'll go over what those are. And in capital outlays, it would have $2,152,500 going out. We'll go over what those are as well. I do want to go down here to the decrease that's happening in 2025, the $2,460,714. None of that really is going to be that decrease. It's really about 2.5 million of the 3.5 million is not going to be spent as biosolids project and things like that. So it's getting reappropriated into 26, but it's not getting spent in 2025. So again, the ending cash balance is going to be more like $5 million than the $2.6 million. If we go to the 6207 detail page, we can kind of see that breakdown of both sides there. So coming into this one, we have some capital improvement projects. We have potentially, and again, it was built into that proposed rate, that $700,000 for the expansion. That would go back towards any sewer expansion or that middle section of the Midwest Industrial Park, if that's there. So that could change, but again, it's 1-to-1 on the ratio if the revenue goes down. And then there is capital replacement of sewer items there. Because if you remember, SRF required in about 2019 that you have to have a asset management program, and really the design is that your rates encompass asset replacement. So that's kind of where we started creating those capital improvement funds in the first place. There were a few things that we had to specific projects that were there, but we're starting to put it in for just overall asset replacement, so pumps and things of that nature, transitioning those over to there somewhat formulaically. The asset software will help us kind of drive those numbers down. In the expenditures, you have the biosolids facility, which again, that was included in the 2025 capital outlays as well, but will not be spent this year. So you have $2 million there, and you have $100,000 in rectangular drive units that would come out for that project. Are there any questions about 6207? Moving on to 6607, which is the the trash and recycling fund. It has approximately $200,000 going into it that we are transferring in. We can kind of look at what those are. It has $252,000 coming out of it. That is actually for, I'll look at the detail. I don't want to say, I think I know what it is, but we'll look at the detail when we get to the detail page. Overall, though, that 252 you will see was budgeted for 2025 as well. It will not be spent this year, so it'll roll over. So that does change that cash balance on this account too. And it brings it up closer to 500,000 realistically at the end of 2026. If we go to the 6607 detail, so what is being transferred in, as we talked about when we were on 6601, is that transfer station that we would like to build out at the landfill. And then what's going out, that $252,000, is landfill cell closure. When we created the new rate at the landfill, we really transitioned using the tax dollars to supplement that, but this was that first piece. This has been in there for several years now. That was transferred in to be used for that when it came back around. But again, that won't be used until we get the notice that we have to close a landfill cell. That's all I have for 6607, unless there are questions. If there are none, that completes all the accounts, unless there's any broader discussion that would like to be had over the budget.
As always, a great job. I think I mean, clearly this year, I feel like maybe more so than in prior years, really dealt down into some of the smaller accounts and took a look at those as opposed to just, oh, it's only $4,500, so don't change it from year to year. So certainly appreciate that. Secondly, I think it's important, anytime we go through a budgeting process, to show the overall, our goals, our intentions, our plans, our hopes and dreams to some degree. So I appreciate seeing, those type of things, especially, with the landfill, with the transfer stations, what we're going to do with recycling, how we can continue to grow that to the best for our use. We've talked for years about the biosolids issue. So, I think it's important to see that those important things are still being considered and still being trying to advance, where some may say, well, you didn't spend it last year, we should take it away or something. But they're very important projects, so it's good to see that they're on the front burner for us.
Correct. And the biosolids, the reasoning is just there's some technologies that aren't fully developed, but we definitely want to consider them. So we did not want to rush forward with the project until we can really make the best decision we can make for that. And it's kind of that, like you said, they're very important. We don't like waiting, but it's just sometimes that's how it is. We have to wait for technology pieces or permitting, or we have to make changes to the treatment plant. Like, for instance, the facility we were looking at, we may build to have that space. We did the roughing tower demolition project, so it's just those things and making sure we were within our budget and following along with how the rates were built so that we're not dipping into cash unexpectedly in any place. So again, there's always the wish list, and then there's how much money do you have, and trying to make that balance at all times, so.
Well, we've said before, we have a very old system, and it costs a lot of money to maintain that system, but it's also very important to keep moving it forward, into the next century, and, keeping an eye on what things are out there what technology there is. And I think in a lot of ways, we've certainly done that.
Yeah, I think we've definitely done a good job at that, trying to anticipate what regulations will be like in 10, 15, 20 years. So as we have to do a project, whether it's somehow tied to the CSO, LTCP, or again, with just changing regulations that we've been handed, whether it's in the landfill side or the other, like the sewer side, it's, if we build this, if this unit's going to last 20 years, then I need to make sure that it's going to cover all proposed regulations for the next 20 years. It may not be what I need exactly now, but I don't want to rebuild it 10 years down the line. It's not a good expense. So we try to factor those things in. There are certain areas, obviously sewer gets harder. You got something that may last 100 years, and trying to predict what anything's going to look like in 100 years is impossible, So it's trying to, but still trying to factor in as much data as you can and try to build for the best, so.
Any other questions or comments? Anything else? I guess I will then close the budget workshop. And That's okay. I will close the budget workshop, and at 11 o'clock, we will start the sanitary board meeting.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now give him time to switch over.
I'm so sorry. I thought you guys were just talking.
We were.